So this coming, for Heritage Day on Wednesday, I have rounded up about 20 loaves of bread to be sold at the library. So that I understand we're closing the museum that day. Is that correct?
Oh, the museum's going to be closed for the rest of the month, right?
Oh, it is?
So the
Except
first of
on
April.
Wednesday.
So the first,
We can let them in that far.
oh, just for the bread?
I
on
had
Wednesday.
one baker that told me today that she got there too late last Wednesday. They had already closed up. She was bringing the bread. And she said that they had already closed. I don't know what time they did that, but I told her that it should be there between 10 and 10:30. So this coming Wednesday, we expect to have some big sales.
Right. All right, as we said, the museum is closed every day but Wednesday when the bread is sold. We hope the museum will be ready for the public April the 1st. Barbara Armstrong of 746 Jacaranda won the Richard Thomas watercolor print of the Egmont Beach House at the recent art festival. She was really thrilled with the picture. I want to thank all of you who helped during that weekend. As we've said before, Island Heritage Day is Wednesday at the library, and we hope you will all attend and tell your friends about it. Island Heritage Day is a month-long event and has 2 more weeks to go. I think we handed out some copies of the schedule, and there are all kinds of events celebrating the sesquicentennial of the 150 years of Florida statehood. There will be boat rides, an ice cream social, walking tours. What is this? Excuse me a minute.
Given me the opportunity to come and share a few words with you. It's a place that I love so very, very much. I don't know where you got that information about that Dick Wiggins Day and all that stuff. That was a long time ago. So I don't know who you've been doing some research, haven't you? But, yes, they did, and I guess that was the first time they'd ever had that happen in Palmetto. You know, when Palmetto beats Braden, they got to do something, you know. After all, that was the way it was back in those days. You know, as I think about the island and the invitation that Carolyn has given to me to come and speak a little bit about the Anna Marias as I remember it, I feel very humbled because, you know, I look out here and I see some of you who know this island much closer in first-hand experience than I do. You know, Hugh Holmes and I have known each other for quite a few years, and I was checking out his age before he came in. I knew he was a little bit older than I was, but he was born on this island. I can't say that, you know, so that means he's a little bit older than I am, and you can guess that we're both somewhere in those 60s or so. A little on the upper side, right, Hugh, rather than the lower side. But we've known each other since he was in high school, and I was over there in Palmetto High School. He went to Braden High School. I see Betty Lou up here. Of course, she's much younger than Hugh and I are, but she was born here on the island also. How many other people do we have here who was born on this island of Anna Maria? Or came here maybe back in the 20s or 30s, you know, can say, yeah, we've been around a long time. Right? We got one raising again. I know Elizabeth Moss over here began to teach school here, and she, like a lot of us, like myself, she lived in Bartow and probably can't even remember the first time you came to the island if you're like I am. My parents brought me out here, you know, when I was a baby, so I can't remember. And I see a cousin of mine, Joyce, back there. Same thing with her. I know her parents brought her out here when she was so young she can't even remember, and kept coming back. So there are a number of you who have had contacts with this island as long or longer than I have. But maybe I can say a few things maybe that others. I asked Hugh, I said, Hugh, have you spoken to this group? Because if you haven't spoken yet, then I'm going to let you speak today, and I'll wait, because you should be ahead of me. But yes, he said he had, so I felt a little more relaxed. I did. Let me go back. I told May, I said, I'm going to go back before I met you, because as I mentioned, we had our honeymoon here back in '48 out here on this island. And I will give a personal word here, because of that summer I was working with you, Holmes and others in the Holmes construction out here. And through you and John, we were able to get a place fairly reasonable and come out on the honeymoon. And when we got out here, the refrigerator was stacked full of food by the guys I worked with, so that was quite a surprise. I don't know whether I ever did say thank you to you, but thank you after all these years. But I told her I'm going to try to go back a little beyond that. There's some memories that have, I guess, that are part special. I guess I can think of the first fish I ever caught. I'm probably showing it to my parents. It was a triggerfish. If any of you know how, you don't catch those easily. I was out here as a kid. My aunt and uncle owned a house right up here on Gulf Drive. And so as a kid, I would have come out and stayed with them during the summertime. And my parents came on out then to pick me up, take me home, and I caught this fish that day, and I knew they were coming, and I wanted to show it to them. The time they got there, after laying out in the sun on the dock out there, it was a little bit ripe, but it was stiff. But you know, my dad took it home and cleaned it. I don't know what happened to it after that. I know my mother wouldn't cook it, but at least he showed that there was took some pride in that particular fish and the experiences that I had. Some of the landmarks back in those days that I can recall, and others of you can, out on the Anna Maria Pier, and we know that was built and used in the earlier years before the bridge days and before the old wooden bridge was there. It was used for boats coming in and cars getting off, and all the materials, like the materials for the Rosa Church, etc., were all hauled over here from St. Petersburg in that area by boat. And I can remember when the landing platform was still out on the city pier, that we're no longer using it, and no longer rolling down Maltese and et cetera down off of that dock. But at one time, of course, there used to be some side railings on that, I guess, to keep people from running off of the thing, because it wasn't any wider than it is now. And of course, there were a lot of other buildings out there at the head of the pier now. I remember then that as being one of the, in my mind, it really hasn't changed that much. The pier is still there. I had to walk out on it today. Look at the people fishing, and I walked all the way around the pier, and I said, well, no one out here knows how to fish but one person. Everybody was fishing out away from the pier, and only one person was fishing under the pier where most of the fish are. People don't understand the concept of fishing unless it's mackerel or something like that. But they were all fishing away from the pier. So it was obvious that they were fairly new to the area as far as the fishing is concerned. But so that is one area that I can remember as being in those earlier years in the 30s that I can remember vividly some of the experiences we had, either when I stayed with my aunt and uncle up here, or when we would come and rent a cottage, my parents would, and of course along with it would be some of my other kinfolks. And this was always summer. I can't say anything about what happened out here in the winter. The old saying, never, never on Sunday. This was never, never in the winter for us. And this was no place to come for any of us who lived around here. Only these people like the Holmes and others and the Blackburns who were raised in Phelps, etc., who were raised out here, as far as we were concerned, were here year-round. But we came out in the summer. So we were summer folks. The folks that the year-round residents didn't like to see come. Because really, honestly, we didn't really appreciate this island. We built fires on the beaches. It was allowed back in those days. And I'm not sure that we always covered up the fires like we should have when we were through with them. I'm sure we didn't clean up the beach like we should have back in those days. We weren't good stewards of this. And so I'm sure that the locals would talk about those summer people that, that come in from Ellington and Palmetto and Bartow and Winter Haven and all those cities inland and come out and feel like they just took over the island. But that's when I came. And as I said, my aunt and uncle had a house just 2 blocks from here for all those years. Then my dad broke down and bought a house on Spring in, I think it was something like 1940, 41. So every summer, we spent all summer out here, and that's when I got to know Hugh before we got off into service at the end of that time. And let me just say, one of the negative aspects about this island at that time was the reason we bought a house. My dad was a very conservative person. He never bought anything except if he could pay in cash or feel like he got a real bargain and still be able to pay in cash. I always wanted him to buy a house out here. I couldn't figure why my aunt and uncle could own a house out here and we couldn't own one. I didn't think they were that much richer than we were. But he always said, I'll never buy a house on Anna Maria. One time we were visiting my aunt and uncle, going down Spring. I saw this house for sale sign out in front of the little house down here on Spring. I drove back up, told Dad there's a house down there. So for some reason, Dad went by and checked it out. The only reason this man was, come on in, Gene, he's been around a while too, I recognize him. The only reason he was selling was the mosquitoes. They were driving him crazy. I remember standing out in the yard, and this man had 2 branches in his hands, and he was doing this, trying to get them off of his back. And he sold the house to my dad while we were standing there for cash. And the only condition that he sold that house was that tomorrow he could leave. Dad would take anything and everything in the house except his personal belongings that he could put in a suitcase and go back north. He was fed up with Anna Maria because of this. Well, Dad, as I said, quick to take up a bargain. He took him up on it, and they closed the deal, and it was done by the next day. And the man was on his way, and I was always glad for that. So that was a negative aspect of Anna Maria, but not just Anna Maria. A lot of parts of Florida at that time had a few more mosquitoes than we have now, and we're grateful for that. But another landmark for me outside of that pier was, and I saw a picture of it today somewhere in one of the books, was the coconut palm line of pine. Remember that? So beautiful. You could ride around back in the days when you would ride on the fenders or sit up in front, and hang on to the headlights and drive along, because you could just tap the coconut palms as you went around. What a beautiful sight that was. Too bad the widening of pine took some of those away, and then we had a couple of severe freezes, and finally those were gone. So that landmark's gone. Remember the pavilion, those of you that had been around for a while. That was over here where the sandbar is now. That was again back in the 30s up until World War II. I think when World War II came, things kind of slowed up, and that pretty well went under because of lack of business. But I'm not sure, Hugh, you can help me when that closed down, but it seemed like it burned, didn't it?
It burned, yeah.
When was that?
That was probably in, probably 43, 44.
Okay, somewhere in the early part of World War II. But that was a social, I was younger then, but, and I wasn't doing any drinking, but they had a ping pong table, and they let you go in and you could play ping pong, and you could sit around and talk, and that was a gathering place for a lot of us in the evening, and the older folk, of course, would have their social hour and the dancing, and I believe they even had the live bands at times over there on certain nights. I'm not sure about whether it was just a jukebox, but it was a very large place, and of course that burned down and never did get replaced for those years on that part. Of course, the Rosa Church was another one. That one had special memories to us, because as we were staying out here after we bought the house, went over and worshiped there, because my mother was one that said, you go to church on Sunday morning, but you don't fish either the rest of the day. You don't fish on Sunday, but you can walk out on the dock, and it allowed us to do that, but we couldn't fish. Well, I'll tie that in. I remember one time I was out here visiting my aunt and uncle and gigged the largest snook I'd ever gigged, and it was on Sunday, because they didn't put in prohibition, and I couldn't tell my parents. I never did tell them I gave an 18-pound snook. I mean, and no one ever told them that I could have a gig that one. That was the largest one I had ever gigged, but it happened to be on Sunday. But that church had fond numbers. Little did I know at that time when I went out and Betty Lou's dad, Hartley Blackman, taught a group of boys, somewhere about that age, and we sat out in the back in a little circle outside, and he taught us. And when this was in earlier years, and in later years, we actually, we're still there, weren't you, at the time, and used your porch. Okay, the youth met over in their house, which was right across diagonal across from the church. And my mother taught for a period of time that particular youth class. That's when I was then in the high school. But that first time of remembering Roser was when I was young enough to have gone and had Hartley Blackburn teach me. That was another one of those special landmarks in this particular community. And as I say, little did I know that I would ever come back to be pastor of that church. Something so that I worshiped there as a junior age, really about a 9, 10, 11-year-old boy, being taught then during high school years. Then during the year I worked with Holmes Construction. They had the contract to build the 2 transepts that went out from Rosa Church, and I worked with a man who formed the windows over the I didn't know what I was doing, but he did, and so all I did was whatever he told me to do. And so we built those transepts. And then, of course, May and I coming out here on a honeymoon. Again, never knowing that I would be coming back out here and being pastor of the church. And by the way, I think you said 50, was it? I came out here in 55. So your research gone on that one. So we missed it by 5 years on that one. So we came back for those 10 years. So those are just a few of the landmarks. And I was trying to write down just a few things that I might have tried to remember. Someone, and I can't talk about Anna Maria unless I talk a little bit about fishing. As it was then, and I'm not going to say anything about it now because some of you have to tell me about that. I'll find that out tomorrow when I have a chance to talk to my good friend, Hiram Cook, who married my cousin. He and I went to 12 years of school together, so I'm going to find out how the fishing is out here when I talk with him tomorrow. But let me just say a few words for those of you who might not have known. Back in those 30s and early 40s, you didn't have to fish with a rod and reel in those days. You used cane poles off the city pier, and what a sight that was when the mackerel were running. Elbow to elbow, lines tangling, and I mean it was fun, exciting. A lot of people saying some words to each other they shouldn't be saying to each other. But anyway, it was quite an experience to be out there when the mackerel were running and you were using cane poles. Same thing, you could go out on trout flats and use a cane pole and fish for trout and catch what you wanted. Another thing that I mentioned about seeing the people fishing today out away from the dock. Joyce knows, her dad, my dad, a few others of those people from inland in the summertime used to fish for mangrove snapper. And there was some pretty good sized mangrove snapper caught out from under the pier. And it was quite an art to skip your line back under the pier. If you couldn't get back under 20 feet, you were just an amateur. I mean, these guys knew how to skip and make it just skip like a rock until their line got at least 20 feet back under where the snapper are, where they could catch the snapper. And they would catch some big ones and all of that. And I still got my dad's pole that he used, and it's still got that bend that and it's strictly from catching snapper off of that city pier. But I'll tell you a story, and since he's not here, I'll tell it on it, but Joyce's brother and myself, my first cousin, we were sitting down at the end of the dock, and this was in high school days. Kind of bored, nothing to do. And an older cousin, about the age of my dad, came by. He said, "Hey fellas, let's have some fun this afternoon." He said, "Why don't you get in the little boat and you go out and get under the pier, and you see those guys fishing." There were some people that were, none of us knew. And he says, "We'll have some fun with them." So they were fishing back under the pier. We eased the little boat along the runway on the opposite side so they could not see us. We went back under the pier, tied up just enough when they skipped that line back that we could reach out with our oar and get it enough to give it a good yank. And meanwhile, this older cousin of ours would go up and he was egging them on, talking about those big snook that was on them. And every now and then, they'd skip that line back to us and we'd get a hold and we'd tie it to the boat. And then just let them have a good time, and finally we'd just cut it with a knife. We let this go. Now, May told me I ought to tell this story. I said, really, no one knows this thing. And I'm telling it publicly. That's the only time we did it. Finally, one skipped one and it landed inside the boat and caught on our boat. And after we got it unhooked and back in the water, we figured we're well enough now. It's been good half an hour, 45 minutes of fun. And we eased back out and sat back down. And you should have heard the stories of some of these guys coming over. They had more fun. We figured we gave them an exciting afternoon. They were all ready to come back with bigger outfits and to catch whatever that was on that. And as far as I know, unless some of you are sitting here that happen to be there that afternoon, none of them know what was really going on. But that city pier was a lot of fun. I think the thing where I got to know Hugh, and he probably told this story, but back in those days it was legal to gig snook. And every summer, and I know the homes and some of the locals, I forget what the season was, but you had a gigging contest, if I remember right. I was pretty young at that time, younger. When was that? That was before the World War II, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. The gigging contest during a certain period of time. And these Hugh and his brother somehow managed, it seemed to me like, to win it. They had a lot of times to practice. Us summer guys never got a chance. We weren't out here long enough to get down the expertise, but his brother had the reputation of being able to throw his gig the furthest and arching it and have the best luck of getting snook that anybody I've ever seen. But we spent a lot of hours out on that dock looking for snook, waiting for them, and that was down on the runway. Back in the days when it was legal to get snook, and when they were. Of course, now there's a lot more snook, thank goodness, to the conservation methods that have taken place. Another thing that was interesting back in those days was the cast netting. Now, Mitch Davis, I think, was the first mayor of Anna Maria, if I remember right? Mitch Davis, as far as I was concerned, was the best cast netter I have ever seen. Also, he used to throw a 14-foot cast net. Now, any of you, I'm a little over 6 foot. Can you imagine a 14-foot cast net, how big it was? I mean, that's a big cast net. And my dad can remember it being thrown when there was a railing, and he could throw it over the railing and be able to open it up and throw it at a distance that other guys could not even throw their, 10 foot or 12 foot. 12 foot was about as big as anyone threw. I know I threw a 10 foot when we were out here later on in years when I was pastor at Rosa. But, and that was big enough for me. But 14 foot, ironically, I inherited that net when I came back to be pastor at Rosa. Somebody had kept it, and they gave it to me. Well, it was made out of cotton net, and you can imagine what cotton is, the bulkiness of it, and the time you tried to get it in your hand, you could hardly hold it. And I used to wonder, how in the world did this man ever throw this 14 foot? Needless to say, I was not able to successfully throw that net. 10 foot was enough for me, even with my height. But Mitch Davis was one of the best one I've seen. That was also the time when the Ticheners and Mitch Davis, and well, that was a little later, they used to do the kingfish run, and they didn't have to buy all the fancy lures or live bait, etc. that people think is necessary. They would take a rope and make their lures out of a rope and troll with that, with a hook turn. And there was a knack to being able to make that. There were enough kingfish back in those days for them to be successful in doing that. So needless to say, fishing was pretty good in those days, and of course there was also the spectacular aspect of it, and that's the sharks. I don't know whether Hugh was involved in this or not, but one of the things we used to do, and I know he was involved a lot of times, we used to sit out on Anna Maria Pier at night and put out a shark line. And I don't know whether Hugh was there the night that Humbug Cobb and I, there were some others, we put out a shark line on the city pier, and then you put a little coil of rope on top of one of the benches, and then you put a tin can on top of it. See, and when the shark hit it, you hear the tin can, and then you go to try to hook him. Well, this particular night, we got tired, nothing happened, so we just went home. But without knowing it, the loop had fallen over the end of the bench. And when we came back out the next morning, and thank goodness we got back out there before, what was the name used to run the pier? Bill, was it? Pelican Bill, they used to call him?
Yeah.
I think Pelican Bill. Before he got out there, here was the bench floating out in the water. Well, we knew what had happened. The loop had fallen over the bench, shark had hit it, popped the bench off the city pier, and we landed a 9-foot shark. We had to get some help to get him hoisted up. We had it out on the pier, but he never did know really how that bench was lost at that particular time. My dad tells the story. You see, this goes back because my dad used to come out here with, again, all these people from off the island, and they used to shark fish off the north end of the Anna Maria. And the way they would do it is throw out lines off the north end and have the campfire and sit around and eat and etc. And they would just tie a rope to their old Maltese. He said one night, one of them forgot to put it in gear. And while they were sitting there eating, they suddenly saw their Model T heading toward the Dean Point. Time they got the brakes put on and stopped, part of it was in the water. There used to be some pretty big sharks off of North Point. I remember flying over in small planes and seeing some pretty good sized shark off of the night. It used to be called Shark Alley. When we were here with that Roser, that used to be the area we used to ski in. But sharks are one of the species that's just about gone now. They're almost an endangered species now, and they need to be controlled as far as the catching of them, and somehow in order to bring them back to be a part of our environment. I thought I would just refer just to Second World War just for a moment. Because we would come out in the summer, and I remember Hugh taking me up to the tower you had over here, and all of the people volunteered to check out the airplanes that came over, if I remember right. You had quite a volunteer group that would be airplane spotters up at the north end, and that would be about where the end of the Anna Maria Park is. All of that was Army at that time, so that was off limits at that particular time because there was a radar station situated up there. The ones that I got most acquainted with was some of the people that were on board the crash boats that were usually tied up at the city pier. These were either Coast Guard or in some cases Air Force crash boats. The reason they were called crash boats is just strictly that. They were in response to the many crashes that took place either when they were doing their training bombing runs on Passage Key, or what we used to call Bird Island, or on Egmont Key, or on some portions of Mullet Key, as it was known back in those days. Now it's Fort DeSoto. I remember myself seeing a plane crash and skip, just standing there one day watching them, and saw it hit and skip into the water. And these were what these crash boats were there for, to be able to respond immediately whenever that happened, and it did happen fairly frequently. I remember one young fellow from New Jersey that was 18 years old at that time, called Mike, and I remember taking some mangoes out to him. Now, if you've ever seen the sight of a young guy from New Jersey never having tasted a mango before, that was an experience to watch him experiment with that mango. Fortunately, he didn't like them, so I didn't have to give him any more. That was something, of course, that was always has been my favorite fruit and still is. Of course, the blackout, not having any lights, no street lights, and that started really before we got into the war, because I remember a time being out on the city pier with my cousin, a year older, and I know he was in the Navy during the war, but we were out swishing for snook one night. There wasn't a light on anywhere. It was one of these pitch black nights, and a manta ray came through the water with a phosphorus. We could see it. We know that a manta ray does not bother you, but nevertheless, when you're two kids that age, and a manta ray comes in and he bumps into that dock hard enough to shake the dock like that, somehow we pulled our lures out of the water. We began to thinking, what if a big snook hit this lure? And it's dark, and we crawled our way back down the pier because it was so dark we could not see either side. So Anna Maria during the World War II with the blackouts was an interesting place, and also the fact that there were, the normal shortages that took place. For instance, I remember some of the piers pilings had to be replaced under the pier, and they didn't have the pressurized pilings that we have today. What they had to make do then was sable palms. Not the best, they don't hold up for just a few years, but when you have to have something, that's what they had. And I remember Melvin Davis was chairman. In fact, he became your foreman. I think this was before he began to work for Homes Construction. He was in charge of getting those pilings on there, so he hired Humbug and I. Now, does anybody not know who Humbug is? This is Lewis Cobb. Lewis Cobb, his parents had the Cobb Marina down here, and Humbug and I have, same grade. We've known each other for a lot of years. But anyway, so Melvin Davis made the mistake of hiring Humbug and myself. Well, we were good workers. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Neither one of us minded getting in the water. And for about 2 months, we just lived in a swimming suit, and no shoes, no shirt, nothing. That's just the way you live down there. But using a crosscut saw, and he was a little guy. I was a pretty good sized fella, so I carried him most of the time on that end of that crosscut saw. But we managed to get those pilings put under that dock. They didn't last too many years, but they lasted through the war anyway, and managed to keep the dock stable. They were even so short of help during that time, they hired me to cut the streets of Anna Maria with their tractor mower. So I had the job of mowing all of the streets of Anna Maria proper. Humbug didn't get that job. They only needed one person, but Humbug usually rode with me. And my mother used to talk about she never had any worries about knowing where we were in the city of Anna Maria, because Humbug was trying to talk to me over the mowers engine, sitting on the back of me, and she could know where we were by hearing Humbug's conversation that was going on the whole time. Nothing was private at that time. But these are just some of the recollections, and I realize I have rambled on, and May knows that this is, if I have any place I call home, it's not Ellington. Ellington has changed too much for me, and I have no family right in Ellington anymore, that I really consider Anna Maria my home, because you can see why, having come such a early age on through the experience of being here at Roser, which were good years for us, and we started our family along pretty good by the time we left. We had the 3 children, and by the way, for those that may not know it, I'll mention this because sometimes it's awkward when you know that someone has 3 children and you ask about them. I'll just say that our oldest daughter did die of breast cancer about 4 years ago, so Becky. And, but a number of you have kind of, you weren't sure, you knew that there had been some tragedy in our family, and you weren't sure just how to ask about it, and I know it's easier sometimes if you already know what the experience has been. Do we have time to have anybody ask a question, see if I could answer, if there is any questions? Well, thank you, I appreciate the opportunity to come in.